Hello, hello, and welcome to another podcast episode of Overpowering Emotions, where I talk all things big emotions, emotion regulation. Today, I want to focus on applying mindfulness and acceptance, which I've talked a lot about in the past few weeks, to emotions specifically. Being able to identify and observe emotions is a key step in emotion regulation. That awareness allows kids to respond in more adaptive ways rather than just reacting impulsively and lashing out. So once they have an understanding of what the purpose of those emotions are and the signals that they're telling, we want to make sure kids are now understanding their emotional experiences. So we can break those emotions down into different components. I know I talked about it a little bit last week, the physical feelings, the thoughts, and the behaviors. And I will be going through each of these individually, and we're going to really be focusing a lot on the behaviors. But the physical feelings, those are the body sensations that are associated with any emotions. So anxiety, for example, often manifests. It could be the fast heartbeat. It could be sweating. It could be, feeling tightness in the chest. The thoughts are the cognitive aspects of emotions. Those might be any stories that kids have or visual sort of, frames, movies that are playing in their head. But if a kiddo feels anxious, they might have thoughts like, I can't do this, or something bad is going to happen. Behaviors are the actions, whatever they do in response to those emotions that we can observe from the outside. So an anxious child, the internalizers, they might bite their nails, they might avoid eye contact, they might become restless, or the externalizers might lash out, chuck a pencil across the room, yell, whatever those things are. So when we're breaking emotions down into those components, kids can better understand the full scope of those experiences and the connections between the physical feelings, their thoughts, and their behaviors. But today I really want to focus specifically on the physiological aspects, how emotions show up in our bodies. This is really where the big problems come from because they're very uncomfortable. Now, those emotions manifest physically before we're even consciously aware of them. And so you've probably had this experience where you're just sitting and all of a sudden like your chest, your heart is pounding, or you just feel tightness in your chest and you're like, what's going on? Anxiety is often felt physically. Really, everything is felt physically. So again, we might feel sick, we might feel headachy, we might have chest pains, we might have tense muscles. And for our kids, they might not label those sensations as nervousness or sadness. They might just know that they're feeling uncomfortable, and they might just say, I have a headache, or I've got a stomach ache, I can't go to school. Now, our bodies, they're amazing at signaling any sort of stress or anxiety. Again, long before our thinking brain catches on. It's usually like, okay, I'm feeling something. What's going on? Right. And so that's why understanding the physical cues is really vital. And so many of my teenagers, as they get older, we've just always talked about, oh, your stomach ache. Let's take care of your stomach ache. Oh, you've got a headache. Let's give you a Tylenol. We'll take care of your headache. And so as they get older, they see it as, I am physically sick. There's not something emotionally going on. And so then they're angry when they come to see me because I'm not a medical doctor who's there to help take their, stomach pain away. I'm there to talk about their feelings. And so they don't make that connection. And it's really important that we do help them make that connection. Earlier, the better. It's the easiest way to identify anxiety, but a lot of kids struggle with that connection, especially, if they can't think, I'm not thinking anything necessarily scary. And if they're always feeling tense and they don't even know what calm feels like, that can be a problem too. But it's really hard. It really is. And it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of practice because so many kids even just have a hard time connecting with their bodies in the first place. And that's why the mindfulness and acceptance is important. They need to learn to sit and notice what's happening in their body. Right? A lot of times they don't realize the inner wisdom that they have. Again, and that's why I wanted to focus last week on the signals that emotions are telling us. It's telling us something important. We do have this inner wisdom. And if they don't know that they have this inner wisdom and these emotions are coming up, they go into a state of helplessness. They go into a state of collapse or clinginess or dependency on others. So they're not discovering those instinctive defensive responses that are alive inside of them. And so we want to make sure they're tapping into that because that's so important. Even if something big that we are worried about, trauma, we can't swoop in to help them. We need them to tap into that inner wisdom. So to help them through this, I always draw a body outline, and then I have them draw out what happens in their body when they feel certain emotions. I'll have them spend a couple of times pointing to the body outline and identifying how they're feeling physiologically in the moment, right? What are you noticing? And it might not even be related to emotions. Okay, I just feel my butt sitting on the chair. I can feel pressure there, right? I can feel, a little twinge in my forehead. My hands are feeling really cold. So we're just going to spend a few minutes just noticing what comes up. I usually have a list of physical sensations that they might experience, like tingling or tension, cold, hot, anything, temperature, shaking. I encourage them to develop their own list too, and they can keep adding to that. But everybody feels things differently. So that's really important. But the key is just to make sure they're aware of what's happening in their body. Now we want to bring that when emotions are arising so that they can respond effectively. Right? So doing a body map of different things that come up through the week. So maybe it's a lightning bolt, through the head for a headache. Like I've just got a splitting headache that just feels like lightning through my head, whatever. Maybe it's a green blob in their stomach because they feel really nauseous, or maybe butterflies. They draw butterflies in their tummy. So that's what they're feeling. So you can see how we're building on that mindfulness. That mindfulness plays such a crucial role here because our brain often misinterprets those non-threatening situations as dangerous. And so if we're feeling sick, something's wrong, alert, danger. Our brain can't tell the difference between I'm being chased by a bear or a cougar and I'm stressing because my friend hasn't texted me back. Both are going to trigger that stress response. And our brain doesn't care if the situation is hazardous or not. It's always going to make its best first guess about what we need to survive or to thrive. I have a helpful video that explains how our body gears up to protect itself by pumping more blood into the system, and then the system needs more oxygen, so we're breathing heavy. If you haven't checked that out, do check that out, and it's helpful to show kids that too. I'll keep it in you can click it here, or I'll put it in the show notes as well. So again, it's just revving up. Kids need to know what's happening in my body. My body's revving up. And so if my body's revving up, we might notice that heart. It's beating faster, so all that blood can be pumped to our muscles. It's preparing us to take action and to protect ourselves. We might notice that, our chest is hurting. If they're not noticing their heartbeat specifically, they just might notice pressure or their chest is hurting. So there's lots of different things that happen in the body that can feel pretty gross. And the physical symptoms, remember there's 3 different parts: the physical, the cognitive, and the behavior. The physical symptoms are the biggest problem. And that's usually what makes anxiety worse, is because kids start to feel worried about feeling any of the physical symptoms. Right? Because those physical symptoms with a lot of the big emotions, they feel uncomfortable. They feel very distressing. And so they want to avoid that feeling. That's what they're avoiding. It's not about, the spider or the dog or the trigger. It's about this uncomfortable feeling that they're trying to get rid of. They're going to do whatever they can to avoid it or make it stop. But there's no stopping it. We don't have any control over what's already happening in our body. And the more we stress about it and the more we try to make it stop, the worse it actually gets. Cortisol is just keeping the body powered up, and it's going to continue on. But because there isn't any real danger, and because we have nowhere to go, we get reactive, maybe even impatient, right? And we continue to misinterpret the situation as dangerous. So it's just going to lead to more worries, more anxiousness, more bodily sensations. So if we're not mindful, we're just getting caught in this vicious cycle because our prefrontal cortex, which is built to calm that nervous system down, to think rationally, right, to help us regulate our emotions, it's offline. The Wi-Fi is cut off because the emotional brain is taken over. And so those physical sensations are now subject to distortion if they don't understand what's going on. And this is a big one. If we look at our kids who self-harm, we know that they don't have a great interoceptive awareness. They don't have a great understanding of those physical symptoms of what's coming up. They're uber aware of their feelings. They're uber aware of the sensations, but they can't interpret what those signals mean. And that's why I spent so much time last week. If you missed it, make sure you go back, because we need to understand what the body is trying to tell us. What are those signals? What do they mean? Kids just know they're uncomfortable, right? And if they can't interpret them, there's that interoceptive uncertainty. And with uncertainty, anxiety takes over. They're fooled by their feelings. They're flooded with their feelings. They can't process them. They can't understand them. And when we can't accurately read them and understand them, we choose the easiest route. Some of them will try to ignore it or eliminate it, but for some individuals who really can't make sense of them, they go to extreme measures like self-harm, like cutting. The pain is relieving, and anything that's relieving is going to reward the brain. When the brain is rewarded, the brain is going to say, hey, keep doing that behavior again. It feels good. The reason it's relieving, even though it's triggering pain, the reason it's relieving is they understand that feeling. They can interpret it. The brain can make sense of it. And so that's calming and that's soothing. So we need to work on making sure that they learn to read and discern what is going on for them in their internal world. So kids need to understand that these physical sensations, it's normal. They're meant to protect them. Recognizing that can really help reduce the fear and worry that often exacerbates anxiety and makes things worse. So if you often feel like you're going to throw up before a test. If you know that's your body's way of gearing up to help you focus and perform better and to give you the energy, you're going to respond very differently. So when they're clear about their feelings and understand where they came from and what they're meant, right? They're way more resilient just from that information. It's not taking the pain away or the discomfort or the nausea away. It's making them more resilient because that information, now it's going to motivate them to respond in helpful ways, to go and write my test. Thank you, body. I know what you're doing. You're giving me the energy and the focus so I can go write my test. So our job as the adult is to validate it sucks. It feels terrible to feel sick to your stomach. It feels terrible to feel like you're about to throw up. It's terrible. So we want to validate how sucky it is, but we're also going to normalize the feelings. Of course you feel like you're going to throw up. You've got a lot of value. That tells me you're a really good student, and this means a lot to you. No wonder. Look at everything that's happening in your body. That totally makes sense. Or of course you feel like your heart is racing, right? Your body is doing what it can to help you in this moment. So that's why the regular practice in terms of the mindfulness, right? Tuning into their bodies, dropping into their bodies throughout the day is so important so that they can notice when those uncomfortable feelings come up, they're still noticing those sensations. They've had the practice of observing them from a distance, not getting wrapped up in them, and realizing they're not dangerous. So when they're practicing regularly, they can start to make sense of those internal experiences. And so if they're making sense of them, it reduces the mystery. And when the mystery and the uncertainty is reduced, they're not going to feel so worried and anxious about them. So for this week, we really want to make sure kids are practicing that mindfulness, becoming detectives of their own bodies, the comfortable and uncomfortable situations. We want to focus on both of those. So we can start breaking down if they, notice any of the discomfort. Maybe we're going to stare at somebody, right? We're going to stare at somebody for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever gets really uncomfortable. And not mom and dad, not mom and kid. It's kid and another kid, not a sibling, like, a peer or another adult. Like, put them in a really uncomfortable situation to practice, and they can notice that discomfort that arises. We're going to normalize those feelings by explaining that their bodies are just trying to protect them, even if it feels uncomfortable. So we can label those internal experiences. They can change their interpretation of the sensations. And just by doing that, that's what's going to calm the amygdala down. It's going to keep the prefrontal cortex engaged. And now they're going to have, when we know the prefrontal cortex is online, they're going to have more control over their responses, and they can avoid getting sucked into anxiety. If you started with the emotion diary last week, keep that going. And now this week, we're going to add in the body maps, right? Where we're going to help kids draw out that body outline. We're going to create a list of the physical sensations that they might experience: tingling, tension, hot, cold, stabbing, sharp, shaking, whatever it is. Encourage them to add to the list through the week as they notice new sensations. And actually, I'll put in the show notes too, maybe just a different example outline that you could just have if you want to just use that with a bunch of different sensations as well. And then using different colors, have them mark what they feel, different emotions and different physical sensations in the body. So maybe there's red anger, like squiggly lines, just to show the anger and tension that they feel in their fists. Maybe there's, a cold, a cold, heavy block in their chest. So it could be a blue brick, rectangle in their chest. So discuss what those sensations might mean. We want to continue identifying the purpose of them as well. So if you started that diary, right, what is our body trying to tell us? What is it trying to signal? What does it need? And we're going to also now include that body map. And at the end of the week, review the emotions, review the body map, continue watching out for the patterns so you can stay on offense so that they know, okay, at recess, this is what happens. And we can start looking at, what are some different responses when it shows up. I'll leave it there. I'll keep building on it, but that's it for today. In the coming weeks, I will talk about shifting their thinking. I don't focus too much on that, but I think it's still important to talk about, especially things like problem solving. But for now, go and do those things, continue the diary, and help those kiddos be bold and courageous. And I will see you next week.